Welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast, where powerful women are interviewed every week to share real inspiring stories and incredible insight to help women or anyone break the barriers, be a part of innovation, shatter the glass ceiling, and dominate to the top of their sport, industry, or life's mission. Join us as we celebrate exceptional women and step into our power. And now, here's your host, Angela Gennari.
Hello and welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast. My name is Angela Gennari, and today I am here with Janet Livingstone. How are you, Janet?
I'm great. Thank you, Angela. It's nice to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm super happy to talk to Janet because I think she's just going to bring a fresh perspective to our podcast today. So Janet Livingstone is the founder of Culture is Key, a consultancy devoted to leadership development, executive coaching, and team effectiveness. Janet helps leaders and the teams take ownership of their own development through intentional work and human connection in the workplace. As a multilingual expert on intercultural competence who has lived and worked on 5 continents, Janet is curious about everyone. She draws on her lived experience to expand dialogue and build trust within hybrid and international teams, both in established companies and startups. Janet enjoys getting people at meetings to connect with each other, studying jazz, and finding humor in everyday observations. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to talk to you because there's nothing I enjoy more than talking about culture and people and what makes us all tick.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Also want to mention that Janet is also the co-host of the Original Syndrome podcast and has traveled to 27 countries. So have you been to all continents, or where are you at on the travel scale?
I've not been to Australia or Antarctica, but I've been to all the others, and I consider myself lucky, and I love to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that has been just, recreational travel, and some of it has been living and working. I've lived in Europe. I have many years of experience living in Europe. And I've worked now in the last 6 or 7 years more in Asia. I've been to China a few times, and I'm going to India for the first time in the middle of June. So I'm excited about that.
Now, is that going to be really hot? India, June? I think that's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. A little steamy.
I think that's guaranteed.
Okay.
I looked at my closet and I was like, I might have to shop for some lighter clothes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool. That's exciting. I love to travel as well. In fact, the company that I owned prior to starting Titan, which is the security company we were talking about, was a travel agency. So I owned a travel agency, and we managed travel for corporations and associations and groups and so forth. And I loved the travel part of the job. That was just, it's, always a different adventure. I love traveling so much.
That's a nice job where you get to go and check out hotels and resorts and stuff.
And you get paid to do it.
Yeah.
Better. Yes.
That sounds sweet. I can imagine that.
Yeah. Not bad. So have you always traveled? Did you grow up traveling, or was that into your adult life? Like what brought you to the travel bug?
Yeah. So I was born into this kind of family that my parents had already traveled a little bit. And so they were really interested in the world. They were sometimes a little bit critical of the US, or they would, sort of make comparisons when we were kids, and they would tell us about it. And then we did travel as a family.
Good.
A fair bit, kind of from the age of, how old was I? I don't know, 8 or something. And like when I grew up, we always had a giant National Geographic map on the fridge.
Yeah.
And so I was interested, like, where is this, and what country is it next to, and what language do they speak there? So that's kind of where it comes from. My mom was she's still a Francophile. She still speaks French.
Yeah.
And so she decided that I should take French lessons when I was a kid. So I started when I was 7.
Okay.
And that was the beginning. And then it just snowballed. I studied more and more languages because it was fun. I was born with an ear. I always liked music. I liked to imitate sounds and people. And I got into it. I could tell you, I could tell you the whole life story, but maybe you have a more succinct question, one more
Oh,
targeted
no. I was just
question.
curious what brought you to loving travel, because it's been
Yeah,
such a huge part of your life and now your career. So I
yeah.
love that. I actually didn't travel much until I was an adult. I
Mhm.
grew up in a family where we took the same vacation to the same place every single year, the same
Oh,
week.
yeah.
And so
Wow.
it was very routine.
Mhm.
And so when I turned 18 and I was kind of like, hey, you can go do what you want now, like I started traveling. I drove across the country from Pennsylvania to California when I was,
Good
I
for
think,
you.
20, maybe 20 years old, 19
That's
or 20.
great.
I had a friend who was going to college in California, and he
Uh-huh.
wanted to take his car from Pennsylvania to California. And I thought, hey, I'll take a road trip. That sounds awesome. So that was interesting.
Nice.
Very interesting. Got to see a lot of the country very up
Mm.
close. So that was fun.
Yeah. I
So as you've made traveling and culture a career, and I love that.
mm,
So tell me, what made you put the two together? What made you say, I think we can make people better at their job and, bring culture into companies. So how
yeah.
did that transition happen?
Yeah, so that was really an organic kind of evolution. So when I started my working career,
Yeah.
it started with a kind of a bang that I had nothing to do with. So when I was in
Mm-hmm.
grad school, I studied international relations,
Oh,
and I
okay.
was in Washington, D.C. And at that time, the revolutions, like the throwing off of communism, started happening in Eastern
Mm,
Europe.
mm-hmm.
And so I got a chance really, really early on to go over to the region, to go to Czechoslovakia with a nonprofit.
Wow.
And first I taught English for a couple months. And then the following year, there were other organizations that had been founded to help out the region. And so I got to go back for a whole year as an instructor of international relations theory and diplomatic history, which sounds really fancy. I had no clue. I had no business doing that. I was a fresh graduate. I was like, well, you want me to teach?
Right.
But but the leaders in Czechoslovakia, for it's now two countries, right? But at that
Mm,
time, they understood that they needed some outside help to reform their higher education system because all the social sciences, economics, all those topics were governed by Marxist Leninist thought. They
mm,
were completely different from what you would study here.
right.
And they were rejoining Europe and they were super excited about it. They felt that that was where they belonged, that they never belonged under the Soviet sphere, but they got the short end of the stick
Mm-hmm.
during World War II and after the war. And so they were desperate for people to come over and teach. And so they didn't mind that I was a fresh graduate. They just were like, this is a cool opportunity. She can teach in English.
Yeah.
Just learning in English will help our students, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up doing that and doing a lot of just crazy things happened. I mean, that moment was intense and I was in the right place at the right time.
Wow, that's so
So
cool.
it was super cool. And to this day, some of the people I taught are very active. So I landed at a newly founded diplomatic academy basically for adults. So these were my first crop of students were people who already had careers. Some of them were
Oh, okay.
engineers, some of them were doctors, some of them did other stuff. And they wanted to join their foreign service, which was, you know, changing because they were a compound country, Czech Republic and Slovakia. They were Czechoslovakia, and
Mm,
their diplomatic corps was 80% Czechs and 20% Slovaks. And I
mm,
got sent to Slovakia, and they knew that they were going to need more people. They kind of saw the writing on the wall that probably someday they were going to be independent and they couldn't just go independent without a foreign service or they wanted to be prepared. So I ended up
mm-hmm.
there And to this day, my former students are like, one of them is the foreign minister now. The other ones are like ambassadors in Brussels.
Wow.
One of the brother is the ambassador to the US. So it's weird and very cool. And
That's
that,
super cool.
yeah, so that was kind of like the beginning of me being like pushed out onto the international stage without a plan.
Right.
And and it was tons of fun. It was really,
Hmm.
really wonderful.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, but that's how I got into nonprofit, and I kept going, and I worked for
Hmm.
various nonprofits around. I worked for one in DC
Hmm.
later, a few years later, that ended up sending me to live in Zambia in Africa.
Very cool.
So yeah, so Zambia is next to Zimbabwe and Angola and the Congo, and it's in there in Central Africa. So that was completely different. And that just kept happening. The nonprofit I worked for saw that I could deal with new situations,
Hmm. Hmm.
that I could communicate with people well enough to get stuff done,
Hmm.
that I was empathetic enough to kind of make things happen, and that I was just flexible.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was hard for me. I mean,
Hmm.
I've been in plenty of sort of weird rat's nest situations. But so they kept sending me to other places to consult or solve problems, or
Yeah.
so I've had that background, and that really gave me an appreciation for what it means to work abroad, to
Hmm.
live somewhere else, what it means for other folks from other places to come and live here in the US. Like, it's much deeper and more complicated a process than most people think, especially people who haven't had the opportunity to travel.
Yeah. Well, and I think travel is one of the biggest gifts that, you can give
Yeah.
yourself and your kids, because I feel like I'm a better leader because I've
Mhm.
traveled a lot, and I'm a better parent because I've traveled a lot, and
Yeah.
it's always been a really important thing for me to share with my son. So, I mean, at 5 months old, he had a passport going to Mexico City with me. So
Ooh, that's excellent.
yeah, his first passport photo was literally me holding him up because he
Oh.
couldn't even hold himself up yet. It's just this great big baby
Yeah.
face. It's the cutest thing
Yeah.
ever. But
Yeah.
I had
That's
work
great.
in Mexico City, and I thought, well, I could get a nanny and, have him be taken care of there, or I could just take him with me, and why not?
Oh,
So he had
oh.
been on over 50 flights before he turned two. And so
Wow.
he
That's
was off.
amazing.
Yeah, but he was,
Wow.
him, it was so cute. Like by the time, he was getting so used to it, he was never one of those like crying babies on the plane. And listen, everybody has different experiences. Sometimes it's, it could be a lot of other reasons that a baby is crying on a plane. And I'm sympathetic to that. But
Yeah.
he had gotten so used to it that we'd get to the security line and he'd pop his shoes off and hold them up so we could put him in shoes. Like you could already know like what the routine is.
Did he take his little baby laptop out of the backpack and
Yeah.
give it?
Yeah, so he's been on cross country flights by himself. He's 16 already. So but yeah, so we always try to go on adventures, and I think it just opens your mind, and it
Absolutely.
changes your reality, because you realize that the world is so much bigger than our little tiny neighborhood and our little school system and our little
Absolutely.
city. It's so much bigger than that, and you don't realize how privileged we are until you see what it really is like to, live in a third world country, and to not have clean
Yep.
water, and to, the things that we take for granted,
Yeah.
especially in America. It's crazy. But yeah, you
Yep.
don't realize how privileged you are and how good you have it until you really see the other side.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that. And wish that everybody in the US could have this gift, that everyone
Mm,
could get to go somewhere really different,
yes.
like somewhere where you absolutely can't speak the language, or somewhere where you look different from everyone else. I mean, that
Yeah.
really it it builds so many skills. It brings so many insights. Like when I first went to Africa, I was like, oh my God, I felt like I had a big light shining on me
Sure.
because I was clearly, distinguishable from a mile away. And the kids used to run by, they'd run by and they'd yell at me, "Hey, Mzungu." They did that in Zambia too. And Mzungu means white person, right?
Uh-huh,
It
uh-huh.
was like, "Hey, white lady." And it wasn't derogatory, it wasn't aggressive or anything. It was just they were like, "Hey, look, there's a white
Yeah,
lady."
it was an acknowledgement. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, it really helped process the
Yeah,
kind of general reactiveness and fear that we can all have
yeah,
when faced with a situation where people around us are really different. So I think it's
yeah.
super valuable.
Absolutely. So, how have you found that people are, and just kind of pivot a little bit, when you're dealing with living in a foreign country, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, what are some of the skills that you've developed in doing something like that you have brought now back to, your function in your work? So,
Mhm.
what skills do you think you've developed?
So I think there are a couple things.
Hmm.
First one is be very aware as much as you can of your own assumptions
Yeah.
about how people behave in public,
Uh-huh.
assumptions about what people expect from you in the workplace or in a meeting,
Right.
assumptions about what's friendly and what isn't, whether it's okay to, touch somebody else. Like sometimes when
Hmm.
I get into a conversation, I might just touch somebody on the arm, like some places, that's not
And you
okay.
think that's
Or,
normal, but it's not. Yeah,
yeah, but it's
absolutely.
not. But it's not. So, what I try to do is do a little research up front, ask
Hmm.
anybody I can who's been to that country or who's from there, like, okay, what is socially acceptable?
Right,
And they'll tell you stuff that you'd never think of. Like
right.
in Thailand, if you come up from behind somebody, even if they're your, good colleague, if you put your hand on their shoulder, like, "Hey, what are you doing?" That's not okay.
Really?
That's
Okay.
really threatening. Yeah, I've never been to Thailand, but that's something that I heard.
Uh-huh.
Um, so you have to intentionally kind of hold back
Yeah.
for
Hmm.
a few days, kind of observe, okay, what's going on? What is it like? So, example, when I was in Russia a long
Yeah.
time ago studying Russian, and I spoke already enough. And when I got there, what I had discounted was that the intonation, the way they speak, right, the melody
Yeah.
sounded so different. I had this reaction like, sounds like everybody's annoyed all the time,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's
Right.
how how people say, oh, if you go to Spain or Italy, it's like if you feel like people are like arguing all the time, but they're not,
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
right? So it's hard not to feel triggered when you think like, oh, everybody's criticizing everyone
Yeah.
else, and there were moments when they were. I mean, there were a
Mm.
lot of weird things that were stressful there, like riding a bus.
Uh-huh.
So I was going around the city by myself. They have great public transport in a place like Russia
Hmm.
and all that whole part of Europe. So I would get on a bus, the bus would be half full,
Yeah.
and I would sit down in a seat because the distances are long there, and chances are I would have been walking for a while.
Right.
And the people in the bus would give me a total like the evil eye, like just completely, like they would stare me down. Sometimes they would directly say to me, "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Where are you sitting?"
Wow.
And I'm like, "What are you talking about? The bus is half full." So the custom there was that you do not sit down. You let old elderly people sit and you let pregnant women sit, but you don't sit unless you have a legitimate reason to sit.
Interesting.
And that blew me away because I'm kind of
Hmm.
like, well, there are available seats
Right.
and, efficiency would dictate or comfort would dictate you sit in one of them. But
Sure.
no, yeah.
Interesting.
And mostly women,
Hmm.
right?
Interesting.
Mostly
Yeah.
women. The men didn't care.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I remember one of the first books that I ever read in my college slash going into business career was a book called Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. And it was really just, a lot of it was how to do business internationally. And I was not a business major, I was a psychology major. And so it was just a fascinating book to me, because it's like, wow, culturally things are so different. And it didn't, I can't tell you anything from that book, because I mean, I read it 20 years ago, but it did open up my mind to say every culture is different. And if you want to be effective in communicating with that culture, it's best to respect their traditions and their social norms. So it definitely did help me. I managed an Orthodox Passover program for several years.
Wow.
And it was, I had been raised Christian. And so there were a lot of things that I just didn't know. And I learned along the way. And I learned it, and I respected it. And but some things that I would have taken for granted, like, I can't just put my hand out to reach out and shake somebody's hand. Like, it's very inappropriate for a man to shake a woman's hand, right? That he's not married to. Like, you can't touch somebody you're not married to. And so, like, things that you just take for granted, even within the US, culturally may not be okay. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is something that we also don't think about, that our own country is incredibly diverse, and there's so much richness, right? Like, even between Christians, like, but I'm personally Jewish, so I'm glad that you're talking about Passover. But for folks from the Pacific Northwest, or where I come from, Boston, actually. The feeling when I meet somebody from Georgia or Alabama, which I met some folks a couple of years back, I feel that there's a difference. There's a difference in the general demeanor, in the tone, in the approachability. And, like, there's some stereotypes there, but for me, they fit the stereotypes. Like, great conversationalists, like to tell stories, that kind of stuff. And I remember when I moved here to Seattle, Seattle's very reserved. They'll tell you, oh, there are tons of people of Scandinavian origin here, so people are introverted and etc. And you can feel that's a lot of the time. I met somebody from Alabama, and I was like, oh, that's so great. Somebody wants to have a conversation. Like, wow. But you know what else I was going to say? So, assumptions, and then asking a lot of questions, and also letting other people know what you're observing and what's different for you. To let them in on what you're experiencing, and to let them know that you're processing.
Well, and ask people the questions that are on your mind, because, like, if I say to you as a Jewish woman, and I say, I want to make sure that I am being sensitive, is there anything that I would do without realizing would be offensive to you, right? And that way you have the opportunity, and I have the opportunity, before anything is said or done, that, maybe let's just get it out on the table, because I don't know what I don't know, right? And so when I first started working with the Passover program, I mean, I made a lot of mistakes that I just didn't know were mistakes, but I had a client who was gentle and kind enough to say, so this is how, you might want to do this instead. And he would never criticize me, but he might, he would make a suggestion. You may want to try this instead. People will be more receptive to this. And as long as you're open to that, there's no reason to take offense to it. For me, like, I wouldn't be offended if somebody said, maybe you want to try this instead of that. Like, I would be totally open to that. But I think as long as you're both open-minded coming into the conversation, and realize, give grace, we're human, but at the same time, be respectful of the people that you're communicating with, because if you're not, and you're going to hold a stance firm, then understand that that's going to prevent full communication. It's going to prevent full vulnerability.
Right. And there may be some consequences that come from that you may or may not see. Right. Moving forward, but it may linger with the folks on the other side.
Resentment, contempt.
Yeah, absolutely. They may think that you're, whatever, bumbling, that you don't care, or that you're offensive on purpose, or who knows what they're going to think. The third thing that I would bring up here, I mean, and there's a whole list of cultural competencies like that,
Sure.
folks have studied, but another thing is to the extent that you're interested in able, and not everybody likes languages and not everybody has an ear, and right, I
Yeah.
totally acknowledge that, but if you're in another country, try to learn some of the language, or at least
Hmm.
be able to recognize a few of the words, because I don't care where you are. I've been in so many different places, and just being able to say one phrase,
Hmm.
it impresses people. First of all, they're surprised because Americans don't usually have the reputation of being multilingual, which
Hmm.
may or may not reflect reality, but we don't have that reputation.
Right.
The second of all, they're really touched, like they feel really good that somebody tried,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right. Especially if you're in their country. Yeah. So
Yeah, it
yeah,
shows respect.
I could not agree with you more. And I think it's a very I mean, obviously we love to travel, we love tourism. We can't, if we want to go to if you go to 47 countries, you may not be able to learn all the languages, but you're right, making an attempt makes all the difference.
It
Um,
does.
I had been to Peru and I did a month volunteering in South America, and I had spent
Cool.
2 weeks in Bogota, Colombia, and then 2 weeks in Cusco, Peru. And on my third week there, I was in Cusco, and Cusco is a huge tourist town, right? Because it's right outside of Machu Picchu, and so all the tourists
Right.
are there, hikers. You've got every outdoorsman. It looks like REI threw up. So, but yeah, it's a huge tourist town. And I was in this little shop, and there's these little markets, and I love these little markets, right? They're wonderful. And
Mm.
so these I don't know, they American or Canadian men were in the store, and they were talking in English, and then they asked all the questions in English. How much is this? What is this? What's this for? And so the woman was having to respond to them only in English because they didn't speak any Spanish. And so one of the items that they had picked up, they had asked how much it was, and she told them, and then they left the store, and I spoke to her in Spanish, and I asked her, so how much is this? And she gave me a completely different price.
Yeah, that's the other perk, right?
Completely different price. So
Yep.
yeah, there's
There's
that
more than
also.
one advantage to speaking the local language. Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I'll tell you, I can't compare the advantage for working with folks, for doing business
Mm,
and working together with other people. If you speak the language, you can get so much further, so much faster. You can build
yes,
trust so much more quickly.
absolutely.
So
100%.
quicker.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it's made a huge difference for me in terms of my working relationships with folks,
Hmm.
in terms of my also your ability to understand what's happening, why people are behaving in a certain way. Like you can catch
Yeah.
some of the subtleties. You can catch that somebody is hesitant for a reason, and you might, right, you might be able to sense it
Hmm.
sooner, and you
Hmm.
may understand what's behind it eventually much better than if you were just an expat. Like this is why
Absolutely.
sometimes when I meet expats who've lived in wherever for 15 years and they still don't speak the local language,
Yeah.
I'm always like, wow,
Yeah.
okay, if you live in China and you haven't been able to learn Chinese, okay, I get that. Chinese is objectively very, very difficult for
Yeah.
us to learn. But, you know, it's not just words, right? When you learn another language, there's the whole cultural and historical background that
Right.
comes with language.
Yes. Yeah.
And
I
so
agree.
you get so much. So, I
Hmm.
mean, I lived in Slovakia, right, for
Yeah.
16, almost 17 years.
Wow.
And the Slovak language completely reflects its geographical position. So the
Interesting.
language that they speak in the capital, Bratislava, which is only like 50 minutes on the train from Vienna, Austria.
Hmm.
So their language is full of German words, Hungarian words, um, Czech words for sure, because the Czechs
Wow.
and Slovaks lived together in one country for decades.
Sure.
And you literally get the history
Interesting.
in the language when they speak. And when I first went there, some of my English students who were real beginners, they would throw out German words at me all the time, and expecting that I would understand them.
Right.
And I had never studied German, and I'm like, what? I don't understand. What are you talking about? And the guy was convinced. He was like, he's trying to say door, and he kept saying, die Tür, Tür, Tür. And I was like, I don't know what a Tür is. Yeah. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. So, what do you think makes Americans different than other cultures when you've traveled so much? What do you think makes Americans stand out? And I know I have my, list of, but
Yeah.
yes.
A bunch of things.
Yeah.
So let's see. If you want to argue that we come out of Puritan traditions, right? Because a lot of the first European settlers who
Right.
moved here were from pretty extreme religious backgrounds.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we've evolved out
Yeah.
of that. And so we still have some fairly conservative views about public behavior, about, I don't know, sexuality. I mean, there's,
Mhm.
okay, the obvious. Like
Right.
when I was younger and we would go to a French movie, or somehow a French movie would come up, my parents would rent one or something. I was always like, why are they naked? Like, what
Yeah.
is happening? Why, what? And so,
Yes.
right. So lots of us in the US tend to be more conservative that way, but
Yeah.
there are many other things, like the sort of politeness that we get from way back from the British heritage that's turned into more sort of friendliness, like smiling all the time. Like most people,
Mm.
you go to their country, they don't necessarily smile all the
Interesting.
time. In fact, I've been introduced to so many folks around the world who don't smile when they shake your hand.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I think that
Yeah,
would be, somebody would think, are they mad at me? Like if they weren't
exactly. Like,
smiling.
it's pretty unsettling. At
Yeah.
first when they started doing that, I was like, what is wrong? Do I look weird? Like
Yeah.
why?
Are they
What's
mad?
happening? Right? Or in lots of cultures, people don't smile when you take their photo.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. In general, US culture, especially in the workplace, tends to be extremely task oriented,
Mm-hmm.
very time conscious, very efficiency content conscious, very transactional.
That's
And
true. Yes.
that's kind of one
Mm-hmm.
of the parameters that, if you study intercultural competency, one of the parameters is about how people perceive time. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so for example, appointments, that's easy. Like
Yeah.
somebody from another culture might think it's perfectly acceptable to come 15 minutes late,
Right.
or my Slovak friends will always say, yeah, I'll see you at 4, and then at 3 minutes to 4 I would get a text. It was all the time, every time. 3 minutes to 4, I'm running late. 2 minutes after 4, I'm still running late. I don't know what's happening. 5 minutes after 4, I can't find a parking place. 4:15. Do you want to do this tomorrow? And I'd be like, hey, I've been at the cafe for half an hour already. Get your butt down
Right.
here.
Right. Right.
Right? Like me, the American,
Mhm.
like, okay, worth it. But right. But there are plenty of cultures where, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
Everybody's
Yeah.
flexible. Or the way people have meetings. The way people
Mm.
have meetings, right? We tend to come in, and this is one thing that I actually try to focus on when I help leaders, when I coach leaders, or when
Yeah.
I help teams kind of think about how they communicate with each other and about their performance.
Mm-hmm.
That usually, not everybody for sure, but the American model is bring the agenda, sit down. Okay, let's get to it. What's the first thing on the agenda? What's the task?
Yeah.
Who's responsible? Okay, give me the status update, blah, 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 right? Very,
Right.
very, you can have a bunch of, people from any Latin country, you've for sure experienced this in Cusco
South America. Yeah.
or in Bogota or wherever you were, right? People talk a
Yes.
lot. They chat, they talk in circles, they talk at the same time, right? Maybe a lot of them, they interrupt each other all the time. Nobody gets offended, right?
It's true.
And you as an American are sitting there going, oh my God, this is chaos. What the heck is going on? When are we going to start the meeting?
Right.
But then in fact, that is the meeting. And then right? When the meeting's over and everybody leaves, and like you'll get an email later, like, that was a really good meeting. I'm doing
and you're
this
like,
and this
we
and
covered
this. And
nothing.
I'm like, what? Yeah. So I mean, those style differences can make a huge impact. Like if I'm a new boss who's been, posted to country X.
Yeah.
And my people are what I perceive as chatting for half an hour, I might get really upset. I might try to crack down on people.
Yeah.
I might try to force them to quote unquote focus on the task at hand.
Right.
When they actually understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Then they're going to perceive me as like this grumpy person without tolerance or whatever. So these things are more important than they seem.
Right.
Right. So it can be really stressful to deal with these kinds of things on a daily basis. And now, of course, like most large corporations have got dispersed global teams and everybody's meeting online.
So how do you think that, what impact do you think that's having culturally?
I think it's creating probably quite a lot of stress that can be insidious, right? Sometimes people don't understand why it's frustrating for them at those meetings, right? Because everybody comes on, the team in India and the team in Israel and the team in China, they've all got different styles.
Right.
They've all got, if the meeting's happening in English, they've all got different accents.
Yes.
Right? So that's objectively difficult, right? I have a wonderful colleague who's our regional director. I work a lot at Boeing. I have a wonderful colleague who's our regional director in Beijing in China. And he's great. Like he's been incredibly productive and he's a really nice guy. And sometimes I don't understand what he's saying because of his pronunciation. And I have to wait for him to say the word 3 or 4 times. Sometimes I miss what's in between because I'm waiting for that word.
Yeah.
So that adds another layer. Sometimes, of course, people from other teams, from other countries, they come in, and people who've been in the company for a couple of years, and maybe those others who are coming in, they're new, they don't know what all the acronyms are. They don't get all the jargon, like I'm running out of runway, and like you hit it out of the ballpark, and we have to level set and all that stuff. I moved here after 13 years in Europe, and I landed and I didn't understand what was happening. I literally didn't understand, because there was all this new jargon had entered the language, mostly from the tech industry.
Interesting.
Which is hugely influential, right? We're all talking about ecosystems and stuff. So there's all kinds of stressors, and what I like to challenge people to do is to address it head on. That is to get to know each other on a personal basis, and that can be facilitated during a meeting. That can be an exercise, right? Pair people off, give them a little thing to fill in the blank, which reveals a lot about who they are, how they grew up, what their house smelled like, when it was dinner time, like whatever, any kind of details that brings you closer to each other.
I like that.
Yeah. The other thing is to find a facilitator, or for the leader themselves who's leading the meeting, to address the communication style differences, to ask folks, okay, we're here in wherever, New York, you're in Buenos Aires, or you're in, Cape Town.
Right.
How do you usually run your meetings? Is
Right.
it polite to interrupt where you are? Do you do recaps at the end of
Mm.
your meetings? Do you
Mm.
send out meeting notes when you're done? Is it
Mm-hmm.
acceptable to raise your voice? Is it acceptable to make jokes? I mean, there's all kinds of things
Yeah.
you can ask,
Yeah, I like that.
right?
And like we were saying earlier, just communicating and asking the question really just gets it front and center. Like, hey,
Yeah,
let's make this less uncomfortable for everybody. Let's make this as
exactly.
put it all out on the table. And that way we're saying I respect you enough to want to know how to do this right for you, right? And
Exactly.
so I think that that's a big factor is just getting everyone on the same page about we're not here to offend anyone. And if we do, it's completely just out of ignorance or,
Yeah,
there's no malice, but, let's get on the same page and we can teach each other. Right. So like,
exactly.
I want to learn how to do things in a different way because it develops who I am as a human being. So
Yeah.
I think just
It
being open enough.
develops
Yeah. Yeah.
it develops our emotional intelligence. This is
Absolutely.
emotional intelligence. And
Absolutely.
right. And the folks that you're offering this to also then have a bunch of insights like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, then when I have my other meeting with that other team in that other place
Yeah.
or from that other industry, I can also ask because sometimes you find cultural differences from industry to industry, right? It doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
to be about nationality or
Yeah.
ethnic differences. I mean, there are cultural differences on all kinds of levels, all kinds.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm.
So culture changed, I think, dramatically during COVID. So how do you feel like culture became a major player, or did it become less of a player, or a factor when we're after COVID? Because I feel like COVID kind of put everything on a
Ooh,
global stage.
wow, that's a great question. Um, okay, so a few things are occurring to me.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, I believe that COVID was a kind of an equalizer,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? Because as you say, it was a global deal.
Yeah.
So we were all stuck somewhere online,
Right. Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
all of us, and we were
Mm-hmm.
all wearing sweatpants from the waist down.
Yeah.
I still am, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
um, and many of us had kids in the background.
Uh-huh.
That brings people closer together. When you see their
Yeah.
kids, right?
Hmm.
Or the kid jumps up on the person's lap during a meeting, or the cat
Hmm.
walks across the keyboard, which happened to
Yeah.
me, I don't know, so many times. Not, I don't own a cat, but with other people.
Uh-huh.
So COVID made us more human, more vulnerable,
Yeah.
which is a big equalizer, which
Yeah.
helps bring folks together.
Hmm.
Um, and it tempers the power distance, the hierarchy,
Yeah.
right?
Sure
Because
does.
when your big boss looks like he just got out of bed with his hair up like
Or you
this,
see his
right? Or
bed not made in the background, or you see
yeah, right?
yeah.
Yeah. You realize, oh,
Mm.
he's human and he has to
Yeah.
admit that he is human.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. I think that it's been a huge strain for us. This is not exactly to do with culture, but I think
Yeah.
not being able to have in-person live contact with our
Hmm.
colleagues has been a huge strain. It's a
Yeah.
strain on our brains, on our function as
Yeah.
humans,
Hmm.
right? We know that now from all the brain scientists. And so that counteracts that equalization of COVID. Like
Hmm.
that creates more stress. And if there are situations in the workplace that are urgent, that are complex, that are difficult to deal with,
Hmm.
it means that, we're already starting from a lower point in terms of how we're feeling, our problem solving ability.
Yeah.
And if we have global teams and we're only online, then we have to be solving problems 24/7, literally,
Hmm.
right? Like I've had
Hmm.
meetings where I was in Europe and I had to have a meeting with my Seattle folks on the line and the Chinese folks, my Chinese colleagues on the line. And
Hmm.
I had to hold that meeting at 2:30 in the morning. I didn't have a
Oof.
choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was rough,
Hmm.
right? Um, so I think COVID, so those are two things about COVID. It's an equalizer but it
Mm-hmm.
also made us a little bit, it's beaten us down. And you know what? I can see now a couple things happening post COVID. I feel them. I don't know. You can tell me if you feel
Mm-hmm.
these too. First thing I feel is that there's a rush to get out. Everybody is like out. My friends are out 5 days a week now
Yeah, I know. It's
doing
exhausting. Yeah, I
stuff.
don't know. I don't
Yeah,
get it. I still really like to be inside my house. Like maybe that's just me, but I still
right?
really just like to be home.
Yeah, so some of us got really used to it. I
Hmm.
think it's easier for the introverts, but
Yeah.
wow, I have these friends who are literally out all the time and I can't keep up with
Hmm.
them. I can't even begin.
Hmm.
The other thing is that you can feel that a lot of people are not okay, that it's
Yeah.
been a huge strain on our mental health.
Hmm. Hmm.
And folks are, yeah, people are, getting upset more easily. Um, Here in Seattle, I don't know about where you are in Atlanta,
Georgia.
but
Yeah.
the drivers here have become like 40% worse than they were
Yeah.
before. Like it's really bad. Really bad. I
Yeah.
feel like people are taking out all that bottled up frustration behind
Mm.
the wheel.
Hmm. Well, I think what COVID did is it revealed the cracks in our
Yeah.
armor. Whether it's
Yeah.
our government, whether it's our personal lives, whether it's our schools, whether it's whatever that is, it revealed the cracks in the armor because all of a sudden there's like, wait, that's and maybe we were just too busy and we were just, too involved in our own lives to notice these things before. But I feel like it revealed all the cracks in our armor, and it really kind of made us sit back and be like, that's not making sense. Or, I'm not as happy as I thought I was. Or maybe this isn't the career for me. And maybe I should be happier in my family. And I just feel like
Yeah.
we started questioning everything. And
Yes.
so when you really start deep diving into issues and questions, and you're no longer living in this like, well, I'm too busy to notice, I think that's when
Yeah.
people start wondering like, maybe everything isn't what it seems. And like, whether it's your family, whether it's your job, whether it's your commute, your city, your, like I said, schools, governments, everything. I mean,
Yeah.
everything started to be questioned. um and I think that was a big part of it, and that's, I mean, maybe amped up the anxiety for people.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a ton of anxiety out there.
Hmm.
And I totally, to build on what you're saying, for me, COVID has been also a gift because
Yeah,
COVID made us stop and think about what's really important to us.
sure. Yeah,
It
sure
made
did.
us think about the fact that others are suffering around us and that we
Mm,
actually have communities, and paying attention to our relationships and our communities actually is essential
yeah.
for us to prosper and survive
Hmm.
and prosper,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
100%.
people who, like you say, people who were just on autopilot, moving full speed forward, that would
Yeah.
we were allowed to do that before. We
Mm.
could. We
Hmm.
could, but when we're not allowed, we have to depend on each other. We have to,
Hmm.
right? And people who are at home with their families, suddenly their family relationships deepened,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Some went the other way. Some had crisis in the family, which I totally understand. Like if you don't have enough space in your
Yeah.
place, right,
Right,
it's
right.
really hard.
Hmm.
But yeah, I feel like ironically, COVID was kind of a gift, and the planet was kind of like, okay,
Right.
humans, like you're
Uh-huh.
taking everything for granted, and there are too many of you, and the planet's suffering. Like you have to stop now, stop and
Yeah.
look
Yeah,
around.
absolutely. I agree with you 100%. So, just to kind of pivot a little bit, so as women, we often give our power away. We often say, give credit or accolades or something, and we don't step into our power. Can you tell me about a time that you gave your power away and perhaps another time that you stepped into your power?
I do a lot of facilitating of executive development, leadership development programs.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that facilitating is more, sometimes it's very active. I deliver modules and I run exercises and stuff, and I'm the I'm the expert in the room.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, I'm more like the MC. And when I first started working with this Boeing team that I work with, there were 2 facilitators. And we would have folks from Chinese Airlines coming to Seattle. Like 25 of them would come for a couple of weeks. Some of them would even come for 3 weeks, which was really very grueling. And they would have a program every day.
Wow.
And in the classroom, we would have to keep them oriented. Like, okay, now we're going to do this. And here comes this expert. And let me introduce him to you and blah, blah, blah. And right. And I worked with another facilitator who is a really brilliant person, like incredibly like quick, very verbal, and younger than me. And I understood after some time that she was working through some stuff and that she had a little bit of anxiety. There was a little bit of agitation there. There was stuff happening. So I decided to let her take the lead because I felt like she was feeling insecure and she wanted to be out front. And for me, I weighed what it would mean, right? Well, what does this mean? Well, it means I'll be talking less and I'll be less visible. Is that a problem for me? Not really.
Yeah.
Is my role going to change because of it? No. And so I stepped back because I also wanted to it was important for me, both personally and professionally, to have a good relationship with her. And I felt like there was some competition happening there. So I did that intentionally. And it was great. I mean, she's incredible. And she did extremely well. And she moved on and now she's doing other stuff. But I also learned from her.
Oh, nice.
Watching her.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So that's one kind of instance I would put forward.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, and it's nice that you did that intentionally and with good results. Like you weren't you were stepping back, but it was for a positive reason.
Yeah.
Nobody was taking that from you.
Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of times when my power was usurped because somebody was just a bigger presence than me and I had no say.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's the usual, the men around you can tend to be bigger, louder, whatever, think differently. So that's happened to me. Yeah. Plenty of times.
Yeah.
But less now.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Uh-huh.
So tell me a little bit more about advice that you would give to your 18-year-old self, because you've set out on some incredible adventures, and I don't know that you'd do anything differently. So what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Well, I wouldn't, in terms of like traveling and getting to know the world, I would not give any different advice. I would not say don't do that. I would definitely let them do it. My 18-year-old self would have needed to understand better in her heart. It's okay to figure out who you are, and then it's okay to be that person. That, if you spend your life trying to be what you think others around you need and want you to be, then you're never going to be completely happy and settled in yourself. You're not going to feel your power. And B, the people around you may not want what you think they do.
Yeah, that's so true.
Right?
Yeah,
right?
So true.
So yeah, you risk not growing into yourself. And so, and then there's a counterpart. I would say to the 40-year-old me, okay, you've lost track of yourself.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
What's happening? You're entitled to go and find her and re-inhabit her, because she's part of you, and she's cool, and she's smart, and she's beautiful in her soul.
Yeah. No. I mean, absolutely. So I love that, because you're right. Because I feel like at 18, we feel like we're about to conquer the world. And then somewhere along the way, we kind of get into this grind where you're like, you're just going through the motions, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I love that you say that, and to reintroduce yourself to the 18-year-old you and say, hey, remember her? She's stunning. She's amazing.
Yeah.
Maybe the two of you can reconnect and say that,
Yeah.
because I like that. It's so powerful.
It can be. It can be like this huge shift. I mean, when I was 45, I started doing amateur theater, and
Yes.
everyone around me was like 25 to 30,
Uh-huh.
and they
Uh-huh.
treated me like I was the same.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, Janet, stand on your head and, jump off the stage. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Break
But
something.
it was,
Yeah.
but it was fabulous
Mm.
because I was forced to be out there,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And it gave me so much, so much. For me, that was the one most powerful thing in terms of becoming comfortable speaking in public,
Yeah.
being the focus of attention. I'm kind of 50-50 introvert extrovert.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and there was some anxiety there earlier on, some pretty palpable anxiety when I think about it now. When I was
Yeah.
back then, I took it for granted. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
But being forced to, literally be on a stage because
Mm-hmm.
you're supposed to be there and people are waiting for you to say your lines and give them something, give them an idea of what's happening, make them laugh or make them cry or whatever.
Yeah.
That was so wonderful because then it breaks that fear.
Yeah. It's so
And
empowering. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I totally recommend it for anybody who's, struggling with public speaking
Yeah.
or, running meetings.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's awesome advice.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed this. I think you're so insightful and I've learned a ton from you, but I have
Oh,
one more question for you. What do
okay.
you wish more people knew?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish more people, especially here in this culture, in our US culture, I wish that more people knew that if you spend all your life aiming for those objectives and those goals and achieving for the future, that you miss all that beautiful stuff that's
Yeah.
happening in front of your nose. Like,
Yeah.
you know, the lilacs are blooming
Mm.
and, the dog over there is, rolling around in the grass and there's color out
Yes.
there and there's music to listen to and
Mm-hmm. And
people to
interesting
share
people.
stuff with. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. There's so many interesting people out there. If you spend
Mm-hmm.
your whole life, you know, just with your colleagues and your accountant,
Yeah.
it's tough.
It is tough. It is tough.
Life is interesting and beautiful. This is what I tell my children. Life
Yes.
life is amazing and the world is really interesting. Try to get what you can out of it.
Oh, that's
Enjoy
so
it.
good. I
Yeah.
agree. So I'm actually in the process of finishing the Matthew McConaughey book, Green Lights.
Oh,
And he says something very
right.
similar. It's all about living in the moment. And, when he gets wrapped up into the whole Hollywood fame thing, he'll just kind of escape and go in an RV for a while or
Mm,
go to a village in Africa or go
mm,
float down the Amazon. Like he does the same thing. Like
yeah.
he forces himself to live in the moment, where in situations where you don't have a choice, but to live in the moment for
Yeah.
survival. And so he does that often, and he talks about the value of it, and how it's changed his life. And I think that what you're saying about appreciate what's around you, the colors, the flavors, the people. I mean, there's so many interesting conversations I have with people, at a bus stop or a
Right?
convenience store, or people
Yeah.
are just fascinating, and you just never know where you're going to run into somebody that just can change your whole life.
Yeah. I mean, human connection is
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing. That's the
Yep,
goal.
absolutely. So Janet Livingstone can be found where?
At cultureiskey.coach. Yes, that's an ending. Dot
Uh-huh.
coach, COACH. And that is my practice of leadership development and executive coaching.
Awesome.
And as we talked about with Angela, I do a lot of coaching that has to do with multicultural businesses, people who are being relocated or people who are just dealing with, intercultural issues. And and I'm going to be working really soon with a company in Central Europe called Under the Apple Tree. That's undertheappletree.co. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and you can also find all of her links on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. So please do check her out. And I can't wait to see what else you come up with, because you have some incredible stories and journeys. And I'm sure you are far from being finished with it all. So congratulations on your success.
Thank you so much, Angela.
All right. Have an amazing day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time, and until then, step into your own power.